Welcome, everyone. So excited to be here with you today. Of course, it is quite an interesting topic of what is going to be the impact of artificial intelligence on the supply chain. In fact, last week I was in India at a conference, and I said it's probably even better here, because I said, what if we did a shot of tequila every time someone said the word AI? By the end of it, we wouldn't be standing up for dinner. So let's just talk a little bit about kind of the hype, but really what I want to focus on today, and it can be quite conversational actually. So if you have a question you want to ask about anything we're talking about here, just go ahead and raise your hand. It's fine. We can take it as interactive as you would like. What I'm trying to do is just paint the perspective of what AI is doing within the supply chain and really focus on some of the more important use cases. Because as Gustavo mentioned, I think a lot of people are in the same situation right now, where they're really, I think, walking towards the shiny object, perhaps trying to figure out how to use the solution when they don't know what yet is the problem. So I think that's a situation many companies are in today, is to really analyze what could be the potential impact relative to the supply chain. So yeah, already introduction, so thank you very much, kind introduction from Gustavo. So I've been working in the supply chain business, next year will be 40 years. I know you're thinking, how is that possible? He looks so young. But it will be actually 40 years. I started in procurement, working for GE actually, but have been working both in consulting and as a practitioner of supply chain for several years. As Gustavo mentioned, I'll be glad to give away a couple of free books today as well. I'm very much focused on also sustainable supply chain, which is what the book is about, sustainable supply chain orchestration. And it clearly is a passion. Not only do we need to run supply chains efficiently and effectively, but we need to also protect our planet, and we also need to protect the people who work in supply chain. So I have the luxury of being our liaison to the United Nations Global Compact, where we focus on ensuring that we're doing things like doing a good job with greenhouse gas emissions, but also making sure that our global supply chains are really focused on making sure we also provide living wages to the people who are working within the supply chain, which is a very clear focus for us as well. Most of you know APIX or ASCM. As you probably don't know, we're almost 70 years old at this point. We do have quite a massive following. We have 50,000 members operating in more than 50 countries through our network of partners, like Advanced Value Chain here. And we've certified literally hundreds of thousands of people at this point in supply chain. But we're also not only focused on talent development, but also assisting large corporations, typically, very complex organizations in their transformation efforts. And that includes things like transformation and better utilizing digital technologies like AI into their supply chain, but also, of course, focused on some of our community efforts. So many people don't know that as an organization, we also support things like workforce development in developing countries, and we do a lot of work with respect to global health, making sure that marginalized communities also have access to medicines, vaccines, medical care, etc. So as an organization, we serve both the individuals as well as the community and the corporations at large. So, a lot of questions about what's happening in the world of AI. This is the way I would like to phrase it. I think artificial intelligence is a powerful amplifier of human ingenuity, yet it can never substitute, it's never a substitute for true talent. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. How does AI assist us in making better, more informed, quicker decisions? But what we refer to as the human loop still has to be part of the equation. The biggest fear factor that we have right now is the fact that technology and talent are not keeping pace. So we're introducing technology faster than we're growing the talent to be able to utilize that technology. This is why we have concerns about people being able to, we had one brave person raise their hand at the back saying, yes, we're able to actually measure the success. many organizations struggle to measure the return on investment for these technology investments that they're making already today. And that's a little bit scary, particularly in the economic times that we're sitting in. So we're going to talk first about what are the applications of AI. Well, what we do know is that, let's just say digital technologies at large, including AI, including aspects of machine learning, etc., are really necessary in today's world because it's unprecedented times for us. We have a greater volume and variety of supply chain disruptions than we've ever had in history. And when I say variety, I'm talking about everything from typical demand and supply shocks to the system to what's happening around the globe geopolitically, and what that could potentially mean, as well as climate disruption, things like cybersecurity, which is geopolitical warfare. All of these aspects are providing us with a challenge, and that is how do we become essentially more resilient within our supply chain. And to become more resilient, we have to rely upon these technologies to assist us in that. So when we think about resiliency, we think about it in terms of strategic resiliency as well as operational resiliency. Operational resiliency is how do we bounce back from disruption? How do we recover from a disruptive event? Strategic resiliency is how do we bounce forward? How do we create a new operating model? How do we absorb what is now a normality of ongoing disruption? So this is, of course, more struggling for organizations in terms of strategic resiliency, not just operational resiliency. And it's clear, it has, we do as ASCM, we have what's called a sensing committee. This is a group of supply chain professionals that take a look at all of the things that are happening within the supply chain world and creating what we refer to as the top 10 trends. The things that are likely to impact most influential in terms of what their trend could mean to the overall supply chain. It's probably no surprise, of course, that artificial intelligence this year, for the first time, actually topped the list of the supply of the trends. And really, when we think about it, it's like, how do we revolutionize the supply chain? How do we digitize it in a more advanced way? Digital supply chain means different things to different people. I'm sure our panelists will certainly be addressing that. But what it certainly doesn't mean is doing the wrong things faster. So we really need to think about how do we absorb this technology and how do we put it to use? And we're going to talk about some of those use cases, whether that's inventory management utilization or better demand planning or supply chain network design or creating scenario modeling, creating digital twins. All of these things are potential applications. I think it's kind of funny that we call it artificial intelligence because it's not artificial. It's actually more fact-based and utilizing more facts, and we'll talk about the cleanliness of data, which is clearly necessary to make this kind of an initiative successful. But you can see it can help us a lot of different ways, and as Gustavo mentioned, we're going to be taking a look at how it influences the end-to-end supply chain with some of the use cases that we'll be taking a look at. So what we do know is that it, of course, is dependent upon some advanced analytics. So being able to gain deeper, again, more factual insights to what's happening across the supply chain. It means that we also have to be able to capture that information. We have to have transparency and visibility to the data across our end-to-end supply chain. And that includes also data that is supported through outside of our own companies. Don't forget the importance of utilizing data from your customers and your suppliers. Also, AI helps us from an analytic basis take a look at other external sources of information and how important that can be in terms of things like increasing forecast accuracy, as an example. It's also meant to help us optimize the supply chain. So how do we do things better? How do we make sure that the efficiency of our supply chain network is performing? How do we make sure that our inventory is optimized so that we have the lowest cost of inventory without, for example, having a stock out, right? And of course, these are things that cannot simply be done through the utilization of the greatest planning system in the world called Excel, right? These are things that require advanced tools and technologies to be utilized. And demand forecasting is probably at the top of the list in terms of where things have been, where AI has been utilized. I mean, it depends on the study, and I'm sure we'll get some Gartner insights from Bernardo later, but really some of the studies are really suggesting that things like inventory level improvements, 20 to 30%, you hear numbers like this. You hear some companies being able to improve the demand accuracy to a much greater degree than ever before. Demand forecasting is a very important aspect of our business, but also chasing accuracy can become quite expensive. So sometimes we have to use also the combination of these technologies to help us make a better informed decision as to about how much should we be spending and getting the demand accuracy greater versus building more agility into the supply chain. This is a critical trade-off that most organizations need to make, particularly if they're chasing that strategic resiliency. And then lastly, what can we use AI for cognitive-wise to assist us in what we do? A few weeks ago, I saw for the first time 2 AI agents negotiating with each other. I was sitting in Washington, D.C. at a conference with the Department of Commerce, and we had one company who was buying transportation and another company who was a 3PL company providing transportation, and the negotiation was happening without any person involved. The 2 AI agents were negotiating with each other, and they sealed a deal, which was kind of cool. So to see all of that and just replace some of the more mundane activities. When we talk about not getting away from the human loop importance, it also means when do humans need to get involved and when can we let go? Not everything I can imagine will be completely automated in the supply chain, but we certainly can remove some of the redundancy of activities that is happening today. So how many are familiar with the SCORE model? Okay, slowly you raise your hands. All right, more coffee for the front. There's nobody in the front. One person. So when the SCORE model came into existence, just to give you a little bit of history on the SCORE model, it was actually, it was put together in 1996. I was lucky enough to work on the first edition of that model. Released to, as Gustavo mentioned, released to the Supply Chain Council in 1997, and since has been the most definitively used model to really analyze the health of your supply chain. And so it's gone through 14 revisions of the model since its inception. The most recent one is the creation of the model that you see in front of you today. It looks very different than the previous versions if you saw the SCORE model before, which looked very linear, right? And of course, those of us who work in supply chain know that's not what it feels like. We're constantly being caused to rethink, reshape, replan, resource, reorder, retransform, all of the time because of, again, a number of disruptive events which are happening. So when we take a look at the potential utilization of AI, I'm going to try to break it down into the SCORE level 1 processes. That's what you see here. So just talking about some of those use cases. As I already mentioned in the plan arena, this is where we're seeing good examples of companies that are doing things like increasing the demand accuracy by utilizing or essentially utilizing AI machine learning techniques to be able to do that. A lot of that is because there are a lot of external signals that are sort of more macro in nature that could also help us influence the accuracy of the forecast. Things like changes in weather and other things. Many organizations were caught out when they weren't really looking at some of the external signals to increase demand forecast accuracy. Particularly, probably the best example was during the time of COVID, when people stopped buying cars because they weren't going anywhere. But we increased the consumption of home networking equipment because we were stuck at home and then we were buying new routers and et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, the automobile industry, when the demand increased again on the post-pandemic rise, which the trajectory down was almost as quick as the rise up, they forgot that in essence, the semiconductor products that were utilized in the home networking equipment were the same that were utilized for some of the automation in an automobile. And so you ended up with automobile makers with parking lots full of vehicles that were uncompleted because they didn't recognize the external demand signals of the consumption of the same products that they were utilizing. So sometimes getting just through that demand planning and forecasting and sensing, etc. As we mentioned, probably another great use case, of course, is on inventory optimization. Anybody not concerned about inventory levels today? Please, by show of hands. Sorry, no? Nobody? Okay. Obviously, things like that, being able to model, do scenario modeling, to do what-if analysis is a critical element that we look at in planning. We were talking earlier today also in planning of some of the transportation logistics opportunities. One of the things that we also do, I won't be presenting on it today, but we have a collaboration. Please go on the website and have a look. We have a collaboration with KPMG, and we do what's called the Supply Chain Stability Index. So taking a look at how unstable the supply chain is. And it's still relatively almost twice as unstable it was on a pre-pandemic basis. It has come down, the trajectory has definitely come down. But what has become interesting is taking a look at what is the biggest contributing factors to instability. In most cases, how many work in planning, by the way, or do something and have some role in S&OP or IBP or something? Okay, a lot of you. So if you think about your S&OP process of yesterday, we almost always took a look at doing what? Balancing demand and supply. We looked at the typical constraints in that balancing activity, and those constraints were typically the availability of supply and our ability to manufacture from a capacity standpoint. We almost never looked at the available capacity or other disruptive events around transportation and logistics. Boy, has that changed. So now what we see is, of course, through the stability index, that the largest contributor to instability is exactly that: transportation, logistics, distribution, warehousing capabilities and capacities, and pricing disruptions. So for the first time ever, it was a bigger contributing factor than ever before. And it comes from a lot of different sources, of course. The availability of truck drivers, or a port strike, or where are the containers in the world, and et cetera. And of course, the pricing has been all over the place relative to pricing of all different modes of shipment: rail, road, maritime, et cetera. So clearly some opportunities there. Also, when we take a look at doing customer segmentation activities, so how do I really define what a supply chain segment looks like? AI is an assisting agent for that activity as well. If we take a look at source, supplier selection, evaluation, so helping us better make decisions relative to the source, that happens to be, a very large contributor to our ability to be agile. If you take a look at supply chain resiliency and our agility aspects, our number one contributing factor to that tends to be the inability for our suppliers to be agile as well. Within the supply chain arena, we take a look at agility as a measure, which is our ability to achieve and sustain an unplanned 20% increase in demand. Most oftentimes, our suppliers are keeping us from being agile because they have the inability to absorb an unplanned 20% increase in demand. So certainly a lot of support relative to analyzing, choosing suppliers, analyzing supplier risk, which is critically important today, and doing things relative to just the automation of the transactional activities that we do with suppliers. I should have mentioned that this list is not exhaustive. These are just giving you some examples of the higher activities where AI is being applied. Also on the order side, load consolidation, you see there, again, automated order management. This is on the order side, this is customers placing orders with you. So what can we do to better assist with that? On the transform side, so this is really making something, either a product or a service, looking at activities where AI can be applied there. Could include things like how we do our production capacity planning. Certainly we do that. Predictive maintenance is has been around. Using AI to do predictive maintenance is really part of an Industry 4.0 initiative at large. So how do we get machines to self-diagnose when maintenance is required? And taking a look at also what can we do in terms of real-time quality control. So taking a look at the quality output of the production facilities. On the fulfill side, again, as I mentioned, with all the disruption on transportation in particular, is taking a look at how do we optimize logistics routings and reroutings, which is sometimes necessary. And also, of course, as I mentioned, customer support, or you can have those automated AI chatbots negotiating with each other in that space. Reverse logistics, critically important. We are much better, much more mature on our forward logistics than we are on return logistics. This is critically important, particularly in the retail e-commerce, and I know some of you come from that particular industry vertical, but it's shocking. In our relationship with the National Retail Federation, we track the percentage of returns coming from e-commerce, which has now exceeded that just about 25% of everything purchased is returned from an e-commerce site. Imagine what we can do if we can automate the reverse logistics in the same way we could in the forward logistics. Also, understanding why those returns are happening is also an application of AI as well. Getting a crisp understanding of why that's happening, even to the demographics of who's making the returns. Who are the individuals making returns and what products are they returning? Who do you think is the biggest violator? Who returns the most? New mothers who have babies where the clothing size is not so common across different manufacturers, and so they buy 3 things and return 2, right? So bad new mothers. No, I'm just kidding. But the reality of it is, even having that as an understanding to know what is the potential and how you can combat that and what are the reasons that returns are happening. Again, critically important for sustainability as well. Then we get in the world of orchestration. This is all the things that we need to do to make the supply chain more effective. So this is not even building efficiency into processes like planning or ordering or transforming, but this is really things like bigger things like risk mitigation. How do I understand what is the probability of a risk event occurring? What's the probability, what we call in the supply chain is a measure which is called value at risk. VAR. Anybody heard the term before? Value at risk. It's how we measure risk. It's the probability times the impact. So what's the probability of a risk event occurring multiplied by the impact that event could have on my supply chain from an economic standpoint. This allows us to understand which risks should most be mitigated. We cannot mitigate all the risks that we have. We can't afford to do that. But understanding and measuring risk becomes a critical capability for organizations today. Also, RCCA, or root cause and corrective action. So how do I understand what's working, what's not working, and how do I put corrective measures in place in order to improve our supply chain efficiencies? Things like real-time dashboards, and again, using some of the analytics for that. And then lastly, which is becoming more popular, which is also a subject of sustainability, which is called circularity. Circularity is where the supply chain and the design chain meet together, making sure that I am already from an engineering standpoint, not just a supply chain perspective, but from an engineering standpoint, am I able to design products which are already designed to be repurposed, reused, or recycled? And that becomes the conversation that has to happen from the design chain side to the supply chain side. So all of these things become critically important, but where do we think the benefits are? This is just a quick listing of those of you, and I think only one raised their hand saying, how do I measure, not the ROI necessarily, that's also very important, measure the ROI of the different initiatives that I'm doing, but what are metrics which are critical that show that if I do these things, those applications that I showed you earlier, what kinds of benefits do I think will bring back to the company? What would be the impact of these efforts? Taking a look at things like, as I said, improved forecast accuracy, things like perfect order, custom orders, decreasing our order cycle times. All of these things are super important to measure. So when you take a look at how to apply different aspects of AI and how to apply them across the end-to-end supply chain, as we just showed with the SCORE model, it becomes super important to understand, how do we measure success? How do we know that these investments that I'm making isn't just this sort of march towards the shiny object, but rather that we can see that there's true impact to the organization? And this is a collection of some of the metrics associated with some of these initiatives. Again, not an exhaustive list. If you're ever curious about the definitions of some of these metrics or the processes that I showed you earlier, please feel free to take a look at the SCORE model. It's online, it's available free of charge to everybody in the world. So score.ascm.org, and you can see there all of the definitions of all the supply chain processes end to end, and all the definitions and calculations of more than 200 different supply chain metrics, so you can align your business to those standards. And then lastly, what are some of the considerations? So what areas to implement? So we have been working very hard to try to give this community tools to be able to really understand where the vulnerabilities of your supply chain exist. So if I said before, AI shouldn't be a solution to an unknown problem. So where can you best make some improvements? Well, the first thing you need to understand is, what's the current state? If I take a look at my supply chain maturity across different plan, order, source, transform, reverse logistics, etc., where do I see the biggest opportunity for an application? That should be the best starting point. So what we did is we created a couple of SCORE-based, and there are 4 in total, but a couple of SCORE-based assessment tools, which again are freely, let me emphasize the word free, that should get your attention right away. Freely available assessment tools, and I'm gonna, the 2 that I would most recommend for most organizations right now are gonna be the end-to-end supply chain process maturity. That's what you see here. So this takes a look at 27 different processes across the end-to-end supply chain. And what we do is we work with our partners here. We create a link for you as organizations. I know some of you just finished an assessment, right? What it does is it illuminates the potential areas where you should be thinking about applications of AI as a solution to some of the weaknesses or vulnerabilities that are illuminated through this assessment. There is a process version of that, and there's also a organizational skills assessment version of that as well. So taking a look at, not only do I have maybe not as high of maturity levels in the processes, but also maybe I have some skill gaps. Maybe I have, again, opportunities to upskill within my supply chain team because perhaps the technology is, in fact, outpacing the talent. So understanding that, doing those 2 together actually is a really, really strong combination. So I'd highly recommend, and I'm going to give you some QR codes here in a second, to take a look at those 2 different assessments. Of course, and we were kind to say garbage in, garbage out. I've heard other versions of that are a little more colorful. But of course, it does have a heavy dependency on things like the dependency on data and information, making sure that we have the right governance, the right quality, of course, data security aspects, etc. Making sure that the integrity of the information that we're utilizing is strong. It doesn't matter which application we're utilizing AI for, if the underlying data is garbage, the result is also going to be garbage. So if we say that the biggest benefactor of using AI is to enable better decision making, it's clear that the underlying data needs to be correct. And I know, again, I think Gardner will have a good position on this as well. The other aspect of this is the decision process of, how do I bring these technologies in? How do I put them in motion? How do I make sure that they're driving the impact? I can build, I can buy, I can do all kinds of different things, partner with people, I can do hybrids, etc. But you really need to take a strong look at, how do these technologies get put into motion, and what are the options that I have relative to that? And then lastly is just a little tiny bit of self-promotion, but the reality of it is there's lots of opportunities for us to upskill depending upon where you are or your team is sitting on their career pathways. Within ASCM over the last 24 months, we've worked super hard to try to understand what the needs of the supply chain community are, and providing all the way from foundational understanding of the supply chain to all the higher stakes certifications that we provide opportunities for education, learning, credentialing, certifying at all levels across that career pathway. And you can see the breadth of those there, including some of our new certificates within our certificate portfolio, which includes things like supply chain technology, where critical technologies like AI, of course, are covered in that portfolio. So just as we close out here and take a look at, will AI impact the supply chain moving forward? Of course. We don't live in a bubble. Of course it's going to impact, but not necessarily in a negative way. Again, if you said, and we just did some research on this, but if you said for organizations who have supply chain professionals, if I took the mundane daily activities away from you, and you instead focused your talent on the critical decision-making processes, two things happen. Your supply chain gets better, and your people are happier, which is of course a critical goal. So we don't look at AI as a threat to the supply chain professional. Actually, look at it as rewarding to be able to take some of those mundane activities away. And then, of course, things like increasing the efficiency of the supply chain, as I mentioned. Deciding where to deploy, do the maturity assessments. That gives you a great example of that. Make sure your data structure, data governance is in place correctly, etc. But education is absolutely key here. Technology is available. It's available now. It's shocking. I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and the entire exhibit floor was nothing but startup AI companies. Well, so we're not lacking for the technology. Of course, there are differences in how that technology can be deployed, differences in the pricing, the maturity levels of the companies who are building the technologies. But the reality of it is education is absolutely necessary in order to get the ROI out of AI. So I want to thank Oswaldo and Gustavo for inviting me here. I'm going to be here on the panel as well. But do take advantage of these four assessments. As I mentioned, if you just shoot the QR code here, the supply chain maturity assessment, the organizational skills and talent assessment. We also have just this week released, in fact, it's not even released yet, it will be released at our conference next week, is our brand new digital capabilities assessment. And then we also have an assessment that takes a look at sustainability maturities across the end-to-end supply chain as well. So again, I'll make the critical message here is these are free of charge. And what you'll get here is the link to a QR code. All you need to do is fill out that information. One of the team members from Advanced Value Chain or from ASCM, together with them, will contact you, walk you through the process of doing that. It's a great starting point to understand where your, again, maturity levels stand across the end-to-end supply chain, including where you are most vulnerable. So thank you very much. And I'll be here on the panel. Were there any questions? Yes.
I do have one question. First of all, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation, Douglas. Regarding the maturity assessment test, what would be the average maturity level companies have?
So it runs on a scale from 1 to 5. And I'd say most companies right now are running on average between 2 and 3. Obviously quite different depending upon which processes we're looking at. The two biggest areas that are the most weak, if I can say it that way, are orchestration. These are the big heavy things that we need to do, like the risk management, like supply chain strategy, segmentation, data integrity and technology enablement, things like that. They tend to be the weakest, as well as plan. Plan historically, since the initiation of the supply chain operations or score reference model or score model, plan tends to be the weakest. So we're better at execution than we are at planning. I like to say we're better at firefighting than fire prevention. And this is very important because we also mistakenly reward firefighting. Yay, we solved another problem. When in fact we shouldn't have had the problem to begin with if we had actually planned correctly. So organizationally we have to make some cultural shifts. But those are the two biggest weaknesses, and tends to be between 2 and 3 at large. It's interesting now we're getting enough people in our database, enough companies in our database to also draw some insights relative to also different maturity levels based upon industry vertical as well. So if we talk specifically about AI, it's retail and e-commerce, which has the highest adoption from an industry vertical, quickly followed by pharma because of the criticality of that supply chain as well. 3PL and logistics comes in a close third in terms of industry verticals adopting AI from our perspective. I think I saw another hand over here.
Thank you, Douglas. An excellent presentation we just saw. And my question is regarding the score model. Has this been updated with the AI initiatives that are being applied at current time?
Yes and no. I would say we're always lagging when we take a look at the frameworks. We certainly do represent AI potential in the most recent release, which, as you probably know, is already almost 2 years ago. So we're looking at the roadmap for updates right now in terms of when we can fully integrate some of the newer technologies into the model. That being said, on the maturity assessments, we're able to insert that to a greater degree on some of the maturity assessments as opposed to the framework or the score model itself. It's always going to play a little bit of catch up to allow you to do things like create digital twins and be able to simulate different activities, to run analytics, to do comparatives on some of the engines that run in the background that assist with that. So there definitely are a number of technology providers out there that would allow for some opportunity to simulate or to build scenarios, etc. Absolutely.
I have one question. It's the following. Once a company do the assessment and determine the maturity level from the supply chain, then how could we know which factor from the score model we should apply the AI? Because from my point of view, from plan, source, order, transform, return, etc., plan is one of the factors that we should have, like this human feeling or touch that we should apply. And probably the AI should be more applied one more time, but in the rest of the factors, not totally on this one that you should have more human touch. Which factor should be the...
We don't leave you with just like, here's what you said your gap was. What we try to do is give you ideation around how to best improve that. And of course, AI would be one of those. There would be others as well. But yeah, absolutely try to give you an understanding of what opportunities exist to close the gap in maturity. So if you're sitting at a 2, but you want to be at a 4, what do you need to do to get there? And then help you consider what are the options and really thoughtfully assemble a roadmap of improvement. Sometimes it will be things like technology, like AI. Sometimes it's going to be educate and upskill your team. Sometimes it could be building more efficiency into your process. Sometimes it could be measure what you're trying to manage because you don't have enough metrics in your system today, those types of things. So really try to pull together a plan for your organization, not just with what the assessment says, your readout says, where you scored, but actually how do you drive improvement going forward.
I truly believe that the supply chains really heavy on planners, buyers, and production schedulers making judgments. So what strategies do you recommend when we are planning to start the using of AI to ensure that the AI boosts the decision making of the collaborators rather than creating distrust or something like that?
So the reality of it is, this is we have, in supply chain world, we have like amnesia. Like this is the same thing we went through with ERP when it first came out, right? And everybody said, I can't possibly trust what the system is telling me to do because I can't connect the dots on everything, right? And then that's when, they said, people were putting in SAP and Oracle and other technologies or advanced planning solutions, et cetera. And then they went back to their spreadsheets, right? Because I'm smarter than that because I can't connect the dots. So I think it goes back kind of to the earlier question about, is there opportunity to utilize technology to test out this, right? You have to do proof cases. The reality of it is, think big, start small, scale fast. Test the things out. Don't be afraid to do a pilot, to do a proof of concept, etc. You need to bring the team along with you. If you want to test out, is AI going to make my production scheduling more efficient? Is my maintenance going to improve in the production environment as a result of that? Test out some of the technologies. Don't be afraid to do a proof case, but know what success looks like, right? Don't try to bring everybody on this big, massive, digital enabled journey and expect that you're going to get initial adoption and alignment across the organization. That isn't going to happen, right? You know that. It isn't going to happen in your environment. So the reality of it is try out some cases, but start with doing the assessments first to understand where am I going to get the biggest bang for my buck, and don't be afraid to do proof of concepts or pilots. Statement. Understand, the best change agent is that people understand what you're trying to achieve. And sometimes we skip that step. Get them on board, because what they're trying to do is they're putting a problem forward that they themselves cannot solve. And the application of AI or whatever tool that you're using should be related to the problem that the worker is trying to resolve. So if you're gonna go off and try to do a pilot, don't force it down the organization's throat. Have the organization engage from the beginning by identifying what the problem is. It's crisp and it's clear. What problem am I trying to solve? So when you go in and say, I want to do an application, it doesn't feel like it came out of nowhere. It should come directly from the bottom up, not the top down. That's why I say do some pilots, do some proof of concepts. Listen to your people. Tell them what's bugging them. What problems can't they solve? Where do they think they can get smarter? What could remove mundane activities from their daily work? Let them design where you think the application, they know best, to be honest. So I wouldn't start from the application down, I'd start from the problem up, and then find the application where it suits best.